The hunger in her belly felt like a gnawing animal as Lillian Turner stumbled down the dusty main street of Taylorsville, Utah, her once fine dress now tattered and her boots worn through at the soles. The spring of 1875 had been unforgiving, and she had not eaten in 3 days. The smell wafting from the bakery made her dizzy with longing, and before she could consider the consequences, her trembling hands had snatched the warm loaf of bread resting on the windowsill. "Hey, stop right there, miss." A deep voice called out behind her as Lillian clutched the bread to her chest and ran, her weakened legs barely carrying her past the general store. She didn't make it far before collapsing against a water trough, her vision swimming with black spots from the exertion. The sound of boots' spurs jingling approached, and she looked up to see a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore a dusty brown hat and a weathered duster, the badge of a deputy sheriff pinned to his vest. To her surprise, he wasn't scowling but regarding her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "I reckon you must be mighty hungry to risk stealing in broad daylight," he said, his voice softer than she expected. Lillian clutched the bread tighter. "I'll work to pay for it," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Please don't take me to jail. I haven't eaten in so long." The man studied her for a long moment, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. "Drink this first," he said, offering it to her. "Name's Yates Ellsworth, deputy sheriff of this fine establishment of dust and trouble." Lillian accepted the water with shaking hands, taking small sips as she'd learned to do when she was this dehydrated. "Lillian Turner," she replied, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry about the bread." To her astonishment, Yates chuckled. "That's my bread you're clutching like gold, Miss Turner. I paid for it this morning and left it to cool while I checked on a disturbance down the street." He crouched down to her level. "And you're welcome to it." In fact, he reached back into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I've got some dried beef here too. Looks like you need it more than me." Tears sprang to Lillian's eyes unbidden. "Why would you help a thief?" Yates shrugged, the movement casual but his eyes serious. "I don't see a thief. I see someone who's fallen on hard times." He offered his hand. "Come on. There's a bench under that cottonwood where you can eat without the whole town gawking." Lillian hesitated, then placed her hand in his, surprised by the gentle strength as he helped her to her feet. As they walked slowly to the tree, she fought the urge to devour the bread in her hands, instead breaking off small pieces to savor. "Where you from, Miss Turner?" Yates asked as they settled on the bench. "St. Louis," she replied between careful bites. "I was traveling west with my uncle after my parents died, but he abandoned me in Salt Lake City when I refused his advances. I've been making my way south, hoping to find work." Yates' jaw tightened. "That's no way to treat kin." "He wasn't real kin," Lillian said softly. "He was my father's business partner. The arrangement was convenient for him. And now you're here in Taylorsville, stealing bread from unsuspecting deputies," Yates said with a gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Well, Miss Turner, you're in luck, Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house was just saying yesterday she needs help with the cleaning and cooking. She's getting on in years and can't manage on her own anymore." Hope fluttered in Lillian's chest, fragile as a butterfly's wing. "Do you think she'd hire someone like me?" "I have no references, no proper clothes. She'll hire you because I'll vouch for you," Yates said firmly. "And if she needs more convincing, I'll tell her about how you nearly outran the fastest deputy in the county." His eyes twinkled with humor. Despite herself, Lillian laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "I doubt that's true, Deputy Ellsworth. Call me Yates," he replied, standing and offering his hand again. "And it's mostly true. I was the fastest last summer, at least. Now finish that bread, and we'll see about getting you situated at Mrs. Holloway's." As Lillian took his hand again, something warm bloomed in her chest that had nothing to do with the food. For the first time in months, she felt the faintest stirring of hope. Mrs. Holloway turned out to be a small, wiry woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She looked Lillian up and down critically, then turned to Yates. "She's half-starved and looks like she'll blow away in a stiff wind," the older woman declared. "But I suppose everyone deserves a chance." "Can you cook, girl?" "Yes, madam," Lillian replied, standing as straight as her weakened body would allow, And I know how to keep accounts. Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose at this last part. Educated, are you? My father was a schoolteacher before he opened his mercantile, Lillian explained. The older woman nodded slowly. Well, that might come in handy. I never did have a head for numbers. She turned to Yates. You vouch for her character, deputy. I do, Yates said firmly, and Lillian was surprised by the conviction in his voice. Then it's settled. Room and board plus $2 a week. You'll help with the cooking, cleaning, and looking after the guests. I've got 4 permanent boarders and sometimes travelers passing through. Mrs. Holloway pointed to a narrow staircase. Room at the top, left side. It's small, but it's private. Get yourself cleaned up and we'll see about finding you something decent to wear. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Lillian could only nod. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, Yates said, tipping his hat. I knew you were a woman of good sense. Oh, go on with you, the older woman said, but Lillian could see she was pleased. And you tell Sheriff Braddon I'm still waiting on him to fix that loose board on my front porch like he promised. Yes, madam, Yates replied with a grin. He turned to Lillian. Miss Turner, I'll check in on you in a few days, see how you're settling in. Thank you, Lillian said softly, for everything. After he left, Mrs. Holloway showed her to the tiny room under the eaves. It was indeed small, with just a narrow bed, a washstand, a hook on the wall for clothes, and a small window that looked out over the back garden. But to Lillian, after weeks of sleeping in barns and under bridges when she could find them, it looked like paradise. There's a bathhouse out back, Mrs. Holloway said. I'll heat water for you. Can't have you serving my boarders looking like you've been dragged behind a stagecoach. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, I won't let you down. The older woman's expression softened slightly. See that you don't. Dinner's at 6. You can start by helping me prepare it. Clean for the first time in weeks and dressed in a simple but well-made calico dress that Mrs. Holloway said had belonged to her daughter, married a sheep rancher up north and wouldn't be caught dead in anything but wool now. Lillian felt almost human again as she helped set the table for the boarders. There was Mr. Peterson, the telegrapher, Mr. and Mrs. Davis, who ran the dry goods store, and Miss Abernathy, the schoolteacher. They all regarded Lillian with curious eyes, but were polite enough not to ask too many questions during her first meal. That night, lying in a real bed with a full stomach, Lillian allowed herself to cry for the first time since her uncle had left her stranded. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, and of the tiniest spark of hope that perhaps her life wasn't over after all. Over the next few weeks, Lillian fell into the rhythm of life at the boarding house. She rose early to help Mrs. Holloway with breakfast, spent the mornings cleaning and doing laundry, and the afternoons baking or preparing dinner. The work was hard but honest, and with regular meals her strength returned quickly, true to his word. Yates came by to check on her, first after 3 days, then a week later. Soon his visits became more regular, often stopping by on his rounds through town, sometimes bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book from the small lending library, once even a pair of sturdy new boots when he noticed her old ones were beyond repair. You don't have to bring me things, Lillian told him one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. The summer air was warm, filled with the scent of Mrs. Holloway's roses climbing the trellis. I know I don't have to, Yates replied, his hat in his hands as he turned it slowly. But I like to. Besides, a lady needs pretty things sometimes. Is that what I am, a lady? Lillian asked, half joking. Yates looked at her then, his gray eyes serious. You've always been a lady, Miss Turner, just one who fell on hard times. Something in his gaze made her heart flutter and she looked away, flustered. Well, thank you for the book. It's been ages since I've had something new to read. Maybe you could read some of it aloud sometime, he suggested. I never was much for reading myself, but I like listening to stories. I'd like that, Lillian said softly. The moment was broken by Mrs. Holloway calling from inside. Lillian, come help me with these pies before they burn. Lillian jumped up. I should go. Yates stood too, placing his hat back on his head. Sunday after church, if you're not too busy, I thought maybe we could go for a walk. Weather's supposed to be fine. I'd like that, Lillian said again, and hurried inside before he could see the blush rising to her cheeks. Mrs. Holloway was standing in the kitchen, eyebrows raised as Lillian rushed to check the pies in the oven. "So, Deputy Ellsworth seems to be finding a lot of crime to investigate around my boarding house lately," the older woman remarked dryly. "He's just being kind," Lillian insisted, though she couldn't keep the smile from her face. "MMHMM," Mrs. Holloway said, unconvinced. "He's a good man, that one. Came here about 5 years ago from Colorado, been deputy ever since. Sheriff Braden says he's never seen a man with a better sense of right and wrong." Lillian carefully removed the perfectly baked apple pies from the oven. "He's been very kind to me." "That he has," Mrs. Holloway agreed, her shrewd eyes watching Lillian's face. "Just be careful with that heart of yours, girl. The West isn't kind to soft things." "I know," Lillian said, her smile fading a little. "Believe me, I know." Sunday came, and after church services, Yates was waiting outside as promised, his horse saddled and ready. "I thought we might ride out to the creek," he said. "It's peaceful there and there's a nice spot for a picnic." Lillian hesitated. "I haven't ridden in years," she admitted. "Daisy here is gentle as a lamb," Yates assured her, patting his horse's neck. "You can ride and I'll walk alongside." "That hardly seems fair." "I've been in the saddle all week. My legs could use the stretch," he insisted. With his help, Lillian mounted the mare, surprised at how quickly the old skill came back to her. Yates walked beside them, leading Daisy by the reins as they left town behind and headed toward the foothills where a small creek ran clear and cool even in the summer heat. The spot Yates had chosen was indeed beautiful, a small clearing beside the creek where cottonwood trees provided dappled shade. He helped Lillian dismount, his hands strong and sure around her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. From his saddlebag, he produced a simple picnic bread, which made them both smile. Cheese, apples, and a jar of preserves that Mrs. Holloway had sent along when she heard of their plans. As they ate, Yates told her stories of his time as a deputy, of the characters who passed through Taylorsville, of the time the mayor's prize pig got loose and led half the town on a chase through the main street. Lillian found herself laughing more than she had in years, and when he asked about her past, she found it easier than expected to tell him about growing up in St. Louis, about her parents' mercantile that failed when her father fell ill, about the hard years after his death when her mother struggled to keep them afloat by taking in sewing. "After she died last winter, I didn't have many options," Lillian explained, her eyes on the flowing water of the creek. "When my father's former partner offered to bring me west with him, claiming he had business interests and could find me a position as a governess or companion, it seemed like providence." Her voice hardened. "I was naive. You were trusting," Yates corrected gently. "There's a difference." "Perhaps," Lillian conceded, "but I've learned my lesson. I won't be so easily fooled again." Yates was quiet for a moment, then said, "Not everyone is looking to take advantage, Lillian." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and she looked up, startled. "I know that now," she said softly. "You've shown me that." The air between them seemed to still, filled with something unspoken but palpable. Yates leaned forward slightly, then hesitated as if unsure of his welcome. Lillian surprised herself by closing the distance, her lips meeting his in a brief, gentle kiss. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with wonder. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted, a slow smile spreading across his face. "What took you so long, deputy?" Lillian teased, feeling bold. Yates laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I reckon I was afraid you'd outrun me again." This time when he kissed her, it was longer, deeper, a promise of something more. Lillian found herself responding with a passion she hadn't known she possessed, her hands coming up to rest on his broad shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "You should know, I'm not just passing through, Lillian Turner. I mean to stay." "Good," Lillian whispered, "because I think I might be too." The summer passed in a golden haze for Lillian. She continued her work at the boarding house, but now her days were brightened by frequent visits from Yates. They went riding on his days off, picnicked by the creek, and sometimes just sat on the boarding house porch in the evenings, talking or reading aloud from whatever book Lillian had borrowed from the lending library. Mrs. Holloway watched their growing relationship with a mixture of approval and concern. "Just be sure you know what you're getting into, girl," she warned one afternoon as they prepared dinner. "Being sweet on a lawman isn't easy. There's always the worry they might not come home." "I know," Lillian replied, kneading bread dough with practiced hands, "but I'd rather have whatever time I can with him than none at all." The older woman nodded slowly. "I felt the same about my Herbert. 20 years we had together before the fever took him. Not enough, but I treasure every one of them." By the time fall arrived, painting the cottonwood leaves gold and bringing a crispness to the air, Lillian had saved enough from her wages to buy fabric for a new dress, a deep blue that Yates said matched the evening sky. She wore it to the harvest dance in October, her heart fluttering when Yates' eyes widened at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and bunting, lanterns casting a warm glow over the gathered townspeople. The local band, consisting of Mr. Peterson on fiddle, the blacksmith on banjo, and surprisingly Sheriff Braddon on harmonica, struck up a lively tune. Lillian hadn't danced in years, but Yates led her confidently, his hand warm at her waist. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," she admitted as they swayed to a slower melody. "Like what?" Yates asked, his gray eyes searching hers. "Happy," she said simply. "Safe." His arm tightened around her. "As long as I'm around, you'll always be safe, Lillian, that's a promise." Later, as they walked back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Yates stopped suddenly, taking both her hands in his. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "But I know what I feel. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I wake up each morning eager to see your smile, to hear your voice. I go to sleep thinking about you, and I've come to realize that I don't want to spend another day wondering if you might someday feel the same way I do." Lillian's heart began to race as Yates dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Lillian Turner, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Yates Ellsworth, I will marry you." He stood and pulled her into an embrace, lifting her off her feet as he spun her around, both of them laughing beneath the vast Utah sky. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Taylorsville, met with general approval and only a few raised eyebrows from those who thought the courtship had been unusually brief. Mrs. Holloway insisted on hosting a small celebration at the boarding house, and even Sheriff Braddon made an appearance, clapping Yates on the shoulder with gruff affection. "About time you settled down," the older man said. "Maybe now you'll stop mooning around the office talking about Miss Turner's eyes." Yates flushed red to the roots of his hair, making Lillian laugh and kiss his cheek. "I like that you talk about my eyes," she assured him. Plans were made for a December wedding, simple but proper in the town church. Lillian began work on her wedding dress, a project that filled her evenings when Yates was on duty. Their happiness seemed complete, but as November brought the first snows to the mountains around Taylorsville, trouble arrived in the form of a telegram. Mr. Peterson brought it to the boarding house himself, his usually cheerful face somber. "For you, Miss Turner," he said, handing her the yellow paper. Lillian opened it with trembling hands, a sense of dread washing over her as she read the brief message. "Found you stop coming to collect what is mine, stop wait for me, stop Harold Jenkins." The name of her uncle, her father's former partner, stared up at her accusingly. Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "Bad news?" Mr. Peterson asked, concerned. "No," Lillian lied, folding the telegram and tucking it into her pocket. "Just an old acquaintance. Thank you for bringing it." As soon as he left, Lillian sank into a chair, her mind racing. How had Harold found her? And what did he mean by coming to collect what is mine? She had nothing of his, nothing at all, unless... With sudden clarity, Lillian remembered the small leather pouch her mother had given her just before she died. "Your father wanted you to have this," she had said. "It's not much, but it might help you start over someday." Inside had been a handful of gold coins and a small, uncut diamond that her father had apparently been saving for years. Lillian had kept it hidden in her reticule, even when Harold had abandoned her, leaving her with only the clothes on her back. She'd almost forgotten about it, the pouch now safely tucked beneath a loose floorboard in her room at the boarding house. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough that Harold might have regretted leaving it behind. Lillian's first instinct was to run, to flee Taylorsville before Harold arrived. But as quickly as the thought came, she dismissed it. She was no longer the desperate, starving girl who had stumbled into town months ago. She had friends here, a job, a home, and Yates, who had given her bread when she was hungry. Yates, who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Yates, who had asked her to be his wife. No, she wouldn't run, but she would need to tell him the truth. That evening, when Yates came by after his rounds, Lillian asked if they could speak privately. They walked to the small garden behind the boarding house, now dormant for the winter, but still offering a measure of privacy. "What is it, Lillian?" Yates asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You've been quiet all evening." Wordlessly, she handed him the telegram. He read it, his expression darkening. "Harold Jenkins, your uncle?" "Yes," Lillian confirmed. "He's found me somehow." "What does he mean? What is mine?" Lillian explained about the pouch, showing him the hiding place beneath the floorboard in her room. The gold coins gleamed in the lamplight, the small diamond catching the light as she placed it in his palm. "My mother said it was my father's nest egg," she explained. He'd been saving it for years in case of hard times. Harold must have known about it or suspected. Yates closed his hand around the diamond, then gently returned it to her. "This is yours, Lillian, by right and by law. If this man abandoned you, he has no claim on anything you possess." "But he's coming here," Lillian said, fear evident in her voice. "What if he tries to take it by force? What if he—" She couldn't finish the thought. Yates placed his hands on her shoulders, his gaze steady and reassuring. "He won't get the chance. I'm the law in this town when Sheriff Braden is away, and he's due to leave tomorrow for the territorial capital. No one is going to hurt you, Lillian, not while I'm alive." The fierce protectiveness in his voice both comforted and alarmed her. "I don't want you putting yourself in danger for me." "It's my job to protect the people of this town," Yates reminded her. "And even if it weren't, I'd still stand between you and anyone who meant you harm. That's what love means, Lillian." Tears filled her eyes, and she leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "And I love you," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "We'll face this together, just like we'll face everything else in our lives." The next morning, Yates stopped by the telegraph office and sent messages to surrounding towns, alerting them to be on the lookout for Harold Jenkins and requesting any information about his whereabouts or criminal history. Then he briefed Sheriff Braden before the older man departed for the territorial capital. "Take care of things while I'm gone, Deputy," Braden said, mounting his horse. "And keep an eye on your lady. Men like this Jenkins character, they don't take kindly to being crossed." "Yes, sir," Yates replied grimly. "I intend to." For the next 3 days, Lillian jumped at every sound, her nerves stretched thin with anticipation. Yates made a point of patrolling past the boarding house frequently, and he spent every evening with her, sometimes staying until Mrs. Holloway pointedly cleared her throat and reminded them of the time. On the 4th day, the stage coach from Salt Lake City arrived, and among the passengers who disembarked was a well-dressed man in his 50s, his silver-streaked hair and beard neatly trimmed, his traveling clothes expensive if somewhat dusty from the journey. Lillian, who was returning to the boarding house after purchasing supplies at the general store, froze in her tracks at the sight of him. Though it had been months since she'd last seen Harold Jenkins, she would know him anywhere. The same cold blue eyes, the same thin-lipped smile that never quite reached those eyes. He spotted her almost immediately, his gaze locking onto her like a predator sighting its prey. "Lillian, my dear niece," he called out, striding toward her with false joviality. "How fortunate to find you so quickly in this quaint little settlement." Lillian felt her throat tighten with fear, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "Mr. Jenkins," she replied, deliberately not using the familiar term uncle. "What brings you to Taylorsville?" His smile thinned further. "I think you know very well what brings me here. We have unfinished business, you and I." "I don't believe we do," Lillian said, grateful that her voice remained steady. You made your intentions quite clear when you left me stranded in Salt Lake City. Harold's expression darkened. A misunderstanding, nothing more. I returned to find you gone. I've been searching for you for months. Why? Lillian challenged, emboldened by the knowledge that they stood on a public street with several curious onlookers watching their exchange. Family should stay together, Harold said smoothly. And I believe you have something that belongs to me. I have nothing of yours. No. His voice hardened. The pouch your mother gave you before she died, the gold and the diamond, those were business assets, entrusted to your father by our partnership. They rightfully belong to me as the surviving partner. That's a lie, Lillian said firmly. Those were my father's personal savings. They have nothing to do with your business arrangement. Harold stepped closer, lowering his voice. Be reasonable, Lillian. Give me what's mine and I'll leave peacefully. Refuse and I might be forced to share certain details about your character with the good people of this town. Would your friends be so welcoming if they knew the truth about you? And what truth would that be, Mr. Jenkins? The new voice came from behind Lillian, and she nearly sagged with relief as Yates stepped up beside her, his deputy's badge gleaming on his vest. Harold's eyes narrowed as he took in the newcomer. This is a private family matter, sir. Is that so? Yates replied, his tone pleasant but his eyes hard, because it sounded to me like you were threatening Miss Turner. And that's something I take a personal interest in, both as the deputy sheriff of Taylorsville and as her fiancé. Surprise flickered across Harold's face, quickly replaced by calculation. Fiancé, my congratulations. All the more reason for us to resolve this matter quickly and amicably. I'm sure you wouldn't want your bride's reputation tarnished by ugly rumors. Mr. Jenkins, I'd like to invite you to continue this conversation at my office, Yates said, his hand resting casually near his holster. Right now. It wasn't a request, and Harold was smart enough to recognize it. He glanced around at the growing crowd of onlookers, then inclined his head in acquiescence. Lead the way, deputy. Yates offered his arm to Lillian, who took it gratefully, drawing strength from his solid presence as they walked toward the sheriff's office with Harold following a few paces behind. Inside the small, tidy office, Yates gestured for Harold to take a seat opposite the desk, while he remained standing, his body positioned protectively between the older man and Lillian. Now, Yates said, his voice calm but authoritative, let's be clear about a few things. Miss Turner is under my protection, both officially as a citizen of this town and personally as the woman I intend to marry. Whatever claims you think you have on her or her property, I suggest you reconsider them very carefully. Harold's facade of civility slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. You're making a mistake, deputy. This woman has deceived you. The property she's withholding from me is worth a considerable sum. The only property I have is what my mother gave me before she died, Lillian interjected. A few gold coins and a small diamond that belonged to my father. They were never part of any business arrangement. Do you have any documentation to support your claim, Mr. Jenkins? Yates asked, Harold's expression soured. The paperwork was lost in a fire some years ago. But I can produce witnesses who will testify to the arrangement between myself and Lillian's father. Convenient, Yates remarked dryly. And these witnesses, they're not currently available, I presume. They're in St. Louis, Harold admitted. I see. Yates leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Jenkins. You're going to leave Miss Turner alone. You're going to make no further claims on her property. And you're going to depart Taylorsville on tomorrow morning's stagecoach. Harold's face reddened with anger. You can't force me to leave town without cause. I've committed no crime. Not yet, Yates agreed. But I received some interesting telegrams this morning from Salt Lake City. Seems there's a businessman there asking questions about a man matching your description who departed rather suddenly, leaving behind some unpaid debts and a very angry hotel proprietor. Would you like me to arrange a meeting? The color drained from Harold's face. There must be some mistake. Perhaps, Yates allowed, but I'd be happy to detain you here while we sort it out. The territorial marshal won't be through for another 2 weeks, but I'm sure you wouldn't mind waiting in our accommodations. He gestured to the single cell at the back of the office, its iron bars looking particularly uninviting. Harold stood abruptly. "This isn't over," he snapped, glaring at Lillian. "That diamond belongs to me and I will have it." "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Jenkins," Yates said, his hand moving to rest on his holster. "I'd advise you to reconsider your words." For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken hostility. Then Harold's shoulders slumped slightly, a calculating gleam entering his eyes. "My apologies," he said smoothly. "The journey has left me fatigued and irritable. Of course I meant no threat. I'll be staying at the hotel tonight, and I'll depart on tomorrow's stagecoach as you suggest, Deputy. Perhaps after a night's rest, we can all discuss this matter more rationally." "There's nothing more to discuss," Yates said firmly, "but I'm glad we understand each other." After Harold had left, Lillian sank into the chair he had vacated, her legs suddenly weak. "He's not giving up," she said quietly. "I know him, Yates. He's just retreating to plan his next move." Yates knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "I know, but neither are we. I've asked a few of the men I trust to keep an eye on him tonight, make sure he doesn't try anything foolish. What if he comes back later after you've become sheriff, after we're married? He's a patient man when it suits him." "Then we'll deal with him then together," Yates promised. "But I have a feeling he'll find easier targets elsewhere. Men like Jenkins, they prey on the vulnerable." "You're not vulnerable anymore, Lillian." She managed a small smile, squeezing his hands. "No, I'm not, thanks to you." "Not just me," Yates corrected gently. "You've built a life here, made friends, earned respect. You did that yourself." That night, Lillian slept fitfully, haunted by memories of the months after her parents' deaths, when Harold's true nature had gradually revealed itself in small, insidious ways, a lingering touch here, an inappropriate comment there, always followed by protestations that she had misunderstood his fatherly affection. She rose before dawn, dressing quietly so as not to disturb Mrs. Holloway. There was something she needed to do, a decision she had made during the long, sleepless hours of the night. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of sunrise when she slipped out of the boarding house and made her way through the quiet streets to the sheriff's office. As she had hoped, Yates was there, having taken the night shift in Sheriff Braden's absence. He looked up in surprise when she entered, immediately alert. "Lillian, what's wrong?" "Nothing," she assured him quickly. "I just needed to see you." Yates relaxed slightly, but his expression remained concerned as he came around the desk to meet her. "Couldn't sleep." "No," she admitted. "I've been thinking about Harold, about the diamond." "Has he approached you again?" Yates asked sharply. No, Lillian said, placing a calming hand on his arm. "But I've made a decision. I want to sell the diamond. Today, before Harold leaves town." Yates looked confused. "Sell it, but why?" "It's your inheritance, Lillian, and that's why it should be my choice what to do with it," she explained. "As long as I have it, Harold will believe he has a claim on it, a reason to come back into our lives. I don't want that shadow hanging over us. Are you sure about this?" Yates asked, studying her face intently. "That diamond could give us a good start, maybe even enough to put a down payment on a small house after we're married." Lillian smiled, touched by his practical consideration of their future. "I'm sure." "Mr. Davis at the general store was a jeweler back east before he came west. He'll give us a fair price, and whatever we get for it, it will be ours free and clear with no ties to the past." Yates considered her words, then nodded slowly. "If that's what you want, I support you. But let me come with you to see Davis. I trust him, but it never hurts to have another set of eyes on a deal like this." By mid-morning, the transaction was complete. Mr. Davis had examined the diamond carefully, pronouncing it of good quality if modest size, and offered a fair price that Lillian accepted without haggling. The gold coins she had decided to keep, tucked away in a new hiding place for emergencies. As they left the general store, the bank draft safely stored in Yates' vest pocket, Lillian felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "It feels good," she told Yates as they walked arm in arm down the main street. "Like I've finally cut the last tie to my old life." "Your old life gave you some good things too," Yates reminded her gently. "Your education, your memories of your parents, your strength. You don't have to forget all of that." "No," Lillian agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder briefly. "Just the bad parts." They were passing the hotel when the door burst open and Harold Jenkins emerged, his face twisted with rage when he spotted them. "You," he snarled, pointing at Lillian. "You ungrateful little, that's far enough, Jenkins," Yates interrupted, stepping slightly in front of Lillian. Harold's eyes darted between them, his breathing heavy. "I know what you've done. I saw you coming out of the general store. You sold the diamond, didn't you? That's none of your business," Yates said firmly. "It was mine," Harold shouted, attracting the attention of passers-by. "That diamond was payment for years of supporting your father's failing business, for taking in his pathetic orphan daughter when no one else would. You abandoned me in a strange city when I wouldn't submit to your advances," Lillian replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "You have no claim on anything of mine." "Liar." Harold's hand moved to his coat pocket and Yates tensed, his own hand dropping to his holster. "Don't do something foolish, Jenkins," Yates warned, his voice low and dangerous. For a moment, it seemed Harold might indeed draw a weapon, his face contorted with fury and avarice. But then his gaze flickered to Yates' hand, poised and ready on his gun, and to the gathering crowd of townspeople watching the confrontation with interest. Slowly his hand emerged from his pocket, empty. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll be back with proof of my claim and with the law on my side." "No, Mr. Jenkins, you won't," came a new voice, deep and authoritative. Sheriff Braden strode up the street, his timing impeccable as he returned from his journey a day earlier than expected. "I've just had a most interesting conversation with the territorial marshal. Seems there's a warrant out for your arrest in Colorado, fraud and embezzlement, if I recall correctly." Harold's face went ashen. That's a mistake, a misunderstanding." "Is it?" Sheriff Braden pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Because this warrant looks mighty official to me. Deputy Ellsworth, would you do the honors?" With grim satisfaction, Yates stepped forward. "Harold Jenkins, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." As Yates led Harold away, the older man's protests falling on deaf ears, Sheriff Braden turned to Lillian with a kind smile. "Miss Turner, I hope my deputy has been taking good care of things in my absence." "Yes, Sheriff," Lillian replied, still somewhat dazed by the sudden turn of events. He's been wonderful." Good, Braden nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Yates is one of the best men I know. You're a lucky woman." With a tip of his hat, he followed after his deputy and their prisoner. That evening, as Lillian and Yates sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, a sense of peace settled over them both. "The marshal will be coming through in 2 days to take Jenkins to Colorado for trial," Yates informed her, his arm around her shoulders. "Sheriff Braden says with the evidence they have, he's likely to spend many years behind bars." "I can hardly believe it's over," Lillian said softly. "After all these months of looking over my shoulder, being afraid he'd find me." "It's over," Yates confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're free, Lillian, we both are." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with love and a new sense of possibility. "So what do we do now?" "Now." Yates smiled, pulling her closer. "Now we plan our wedding and our life together." "I like the sound of that," Lillian whispered, leaning in to kiss him as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, giving way to the vast, star-studded expanse of the Utah night. The weeks leading up to their December wedding passed in a blur of preparations and happiness. With the money from the diamond sale, Yates put a down payment on a small house on the edge of town, close enough for both of them to walk to their respective duties, but with enough land for a garden and perhaps someday, a few horses. Mrs. Holloway insisted on hosting the wedding breakfast at the boarding house, declaring that Lillian was like a daughter to me now, and I won't have anyone else taking over. Miss Abernathy, the schoolteacher, helped Lillian finish her wedding dress, adding delicate embroidery to the simple white cotton that transformed it into something truly special. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sky a brilliant blue above the snow-covered landscape. The small church was filled with nearly everyone in Taylorsville, all come to see the deputy sheriff marry the woman who had arrived in their midst as a desperate stranger and had become a beloved member of their community. Sheriff Braden stood as Yates' best man, while Mrs. Holloway, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, gave Lillian away in place of the family she had lost. As they exchanged their vows, Lillian looked into Yates' gray eyes and saw her future reflected there, a future of safety, of belonging, of love. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife, and Yates bent to kiss her with gentle reverence, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home at last. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing and more food than Lillian had seen in one place since before her parents died. As the evening wore on, Yates took her hand and led her outside, where they stood for a moment in the crisp winter air, gazing up at the stars. "Happy, Mrs. Ellsworth?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the cold. "More than I ever thought possible," Lillian replied honestly, leaning against his solid warmth. "You know, I've been thinking about that day we met," Yates said thoughtfully, "when you stole my bread." Lillian laughed softly, the memory no longer painful. "And you gave me the whole loaf. Best decision I ever made," Yates declared, pulling her closer, "though asking you to marry me was a close second." "I'm glad you did both," Lillian said, turning in his arms to face him. "I don't know where I'd be now if you hadn't. We found each other," Yates said simply. "That's all that matters." As they kissed beneath the vast expanse of stars, Lillian knew that he was right. From the lowest point in her life, stealing bread to survive, she had found not just sustenance but love, not just shelter but a home. The journey had been difficult, but standing here now in her husband's arms, Lillian knew that every step had led her exactly where she was meant to be. In the spring of 1876, as the snow melted from the mountains and the first wildflowers began to dot the meadows around Taylorsville, Lillian stood in the doorway of their small house, watching as Yates chopped wood in the yard. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, revealing powerful forearms as he swung the axe in a steady rhythm. Life as Mrs. Ellsworth had settled into a pleasant routine. Lillian had continued working at the boarding house part-time, helping Mrs. Holloway with the accounts and the baking she had become known for around town. Yates continued his duties as deputy sheriff, though Sheriff Braden had begun talking more frequently about retirement, hinting strongly that Yates would be his chosen successor. Their little house had become a true home, with curtains Lillian had sewn herself, a vegetable garden she had planted out back, and a small stable where Daisy and the new mare Yates had given Lillian as a wedding present were housed. They had named the gentle bay mare Penny, for her copper-colored coat that gleamed in the sunlight. As Lillian watched her husband work, a wave of love washed over her, followed quickly by a flutter of nervous anticipation. She had news to share, news she had been certain of for several weeks now, but had waited to confirm with Doc Wilson yesterday while Yates was on patrol. Yates paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool spring air, and caught sight of her watching him. His face broke into the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "Admiring the view, Mrs. Ellsworth?" he called teasingly, setting down the axe and walking toward her. "Indeed I am, Deputy Ellsworth," she replied with a smile of her own, "though I think you might be working too hard. Come inside and have some lemonade." In the kitchen, which smelled of the fresh bread Lillian had baked that morning, Yates accepted the cool drink gratefully, draining half the glass in one long swallow. "You're looking especially beautiful today," he observed, setting down the glass and pulling her into a loose embrace. "Something different about you." Lillian's pulse quickened. "Actually, there is something different," she began, her voice soft but steady. "Something I need to tell you." Yates' expression grew concerned. "Is everything all right?" "More than all right," Lillian assured him, taking his hand and placing it gently over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Yates, in late October, Doc Wilson thinks." For a moment, Yates just stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. Then a look of such pure joy spread across his face that Lillian felt tears spring to her eyes in response. "A baby," he whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make the miracle disappear. "Our baby." "Yes," Lillian confirmed, her own joy bubbling up and spilling over in a laugh that was half sob. "Our baby." Yates lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen before suddenly stopping, his expression shifting to concern. "Should I be doing that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby." Lillian laughed, touched by his instant protectiveness. I'm not made of glass, Yates. I'm perfectly fine, though I might not be saying that in a few months when I'm as big as a house. He kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and promise. You could be as big as the bank, and I'd still think you were the most beautiful woman in Utah Territory. As word of their impending parenthood spread through Taylorsville, Lillian found herself the recipient of all manner of advice, much of it contradictory, from the women of the town. Mrs. Holloway insisted that carrying high meant a boy, while Mrs. Davis was equally certain that Lillian's glowing complexion indicated a girl. Miss Abernathy now engaged herself to the new telegraph operator who had replaced Mr. Peterson when the latter moved to Salt Lake City, simply offered practical gifts of tiny sewn garments and a beautiful hand-knitted blanket. The summer passed in a haze of anticipation and preparation. Yates converted the small second bedroom of their house, which had been serving as a storage room, into a nursery, building a cradle himself from pine wood that he stained and polished until it gleamed. My father was a carpenter, he explained when Lillian expressed admiration for his skill. He taught me the basics before he died. I've never had much cause to use them until now. The revelation surprised Lillian, who realized there was still much about her husband's past that she didn't know. That evening, as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset, she asked him to tell her more about his childhood. Not much to tell, really, Yates said with a shrug. Grew up in a small town in Colorado. Father was a carpenter, mother took in washing. Both died of the fever when I was 16. I worked odd jobs for a few years, then became a deputy in a town not much bigger than Taylorsville. Moved around a bit, ended up here 5 years ago. And your family, any brothers or sisters? Had a younger sister, Yates said, his voice softening with old grief. She died the same time as my parents. I was the only one who didn't get sick somehow. Lillian placed her hand over his where it rested on the arm of his chair. I'm sorry, Yates, I didn't know. It was a long time ago, he said, turning his hand to clasp hers. I made my peace with it, but it's part of why I became a lawman, I think. Wanted to protect people since I couldn't protect my family. You protect people every day, Lillian assured him, and you'll protect our child too. Yates smiled, his free hand coming to rest on the gentle swell of her belly, now visible beneath her dress. With my life, he promised. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Lillian's time drew near. Sheriff Braden had indeed announced his retirement, effective the first of the year, and the town council had unanimously voted to promote Yates to sheriff in his place. The news had been celebrated throughout Taylorsville, where Yates' fair-mindedness and courage had earned him universal respect. Soon I'll be married to the sheriff, Lillian teased as they lay in bed one night in mid-October, her large belly making comfortable positions increasingly rare. I'll have to start acting more respectable. You're already the most respectable woman in town, Yates murmured sleepily, his hand resting protectively over their child. The most beautiful, too. Lillian was about to reply when a sharp pain seized her, causing her to gasp. Yates was instantly alert, sitting up beside her. What is it? The baby, I think so, Lillian managed, breathing through the pain as it subsided. But it's too early, we have 2 more weeks. Babies don't always follow schedules, Yates said, already pulling on his clothes. I'll get Doc Wilson. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of pain and determination for Lillian. Doc Wilson arrived promptly, as did Mrs. Holloway, who insisted on being present, since the girl has no mother to help her through. Yates was banished to the porch, where he paced ceaselessly, coming in only when summoned to bring hot water or fresh linens. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lillian's labor intensified. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, but with each contraction, she reminded herself that women had been doing this since the beginning of time, that she was strong enough, that soon she would hold her child in her arms. You're doing wonderfully, Mrs. Ellsworth, Doc Wilson encouraged as he checked her progress. Won't be much longer now. I need Yates, Lillian gasped between pains. Please. Despite Mrs. Holloway's protests that men had no place in the birthing room, Doc Wilson nodded and went to the door, calling for Yates to come in. Her husband's face was pale with worry as he knelt beside the bed, taking her hand in his. "I'm here, Lillian, I'm right here. Don't leave," she pleaded as another contraction began to build. "Never," Yates promised, his grip firm and reassuring, "not for anything in the world." With Yates beside her, Lillian found new strength. When Doc Wilson declared it was time to push, she bore down with all her might, gritting her teeth against the tearing pain. "I can see the head," the doctor announced. "One more good push, Mrs. Ellsworth." Gathering every ounce of strength she possessed, Lillian pushed, her cry of pain transforming into one of wonder as she felt her child slip from her body. A moment later, a new sound filled the room, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "You have a son," Doc Wilson declared, quickly wiping the squalling infant and placing him on Lillian's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Lillian looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair so like his father's, the perfect miniature fingers, and felt love unlike anything she had ever known wash over her. "Hello," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my sweet boy." Beside her, Yates was crying too, unashamed tears tracking down his weathered cheeks as he reached out with trembling fingers to touch his son's head. "He's perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Just perfect." In that moment, as the three of them huddled together in the golden light of dawn, Lillian knew that her journey had come full circle. From the starving, desperate woman who had stolen a loaf of bread from a kind stranger, to a wife and now a mother, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. They named the boy Thomas Herbert Ellsworth Thomas for Lillian's father, and Herbert for Mrs. Holloway's late husband, a gesture that brought tears to the older woman's eyes when they told her. "A fine, strong name for a fine, strong boy," she declared, holding the infant with practiced ease. "He has your eyes, Lillian, but his father's chin, I think." As Thomas grew from newborn to infant to toddler, their life in Taylorsville settled into a rhythm of deep contentment. Yates assumed the role of sheriff with the same quiet competence he had shown as deputy, and if he worried more now that he had a family to protect, he never let it show to anyone but Lillian in the privacy of their home. Lillian herself had given up her position at the boarding house when Thomas was born, but she continued to help with the accounts from home, and her bread and pies were still sought after for social gatherings and church suppers. She found that motherhood suited her, that the love she felt for her son was a wellspring that never ran dry, even on days when he was fussy or sick, or simply exhausting in the way that only small children can be. As Thomas approached his second birthday, Lillian discovered she was expecting again. This time, the pregnancy passed without complications, and in the summer of 1879, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Sarah Rose after both their mothers. "A matched set," Yates joked as he held his daughter for the first time, gazing down at her with the same wonder he had shown when Thomas was born. "A boy and a girl. We're blessed, Lillian." "We are," she agreed, watching as Thomas, now a sturdy toddler with his father's gray eyes and her own auburn hair, climbed carefully onto the bed to peer at his new sister. "More blessed than I ever dreamed possible." Life was not without its challenges, of course. There were the usual hardships of frontier life: harsh winters, occasional drought, the isolation that came with living in a small town far from major cities. There was the time Thomas fell from the apple tree in their yard and broke his arm, giving them both a terrible fright. There was the spring when Yates was shot while apprehending a gang of cattle rustlers, the bullet grazing his side and leaving a scar that made Lillian's heart stop whenever she saw it, reminded anew of how close she had come to losing him. But through it all, they had each other and their children and the community they had built around them. Taylorsville grew slowly but steadily, with new families arriving each year, drawn by the fertile land and the reputation for safety that Sheriff Ellsworth had established. A proper school was built, where Miss Abernathy, now Mrs. Peterson, after her marriage to the telegraph operator, taught the town's children with firm kindness. A new church was raised, with a proper steeple that could be seen for miles across the valley. And through it all, Lillian never forgot where she had come from, or the desperate hunger that had driven her to steal a loaf of bread from a stranger. Each week, She baked extra loaves to be distributed to those in need, and she and Yates kept an open door for travelers down on their luck, offering a meal and sometimes work to those who needed it. "You can't save everyone," Yates reminded her gently one evening after she had spent hours helping a family whose wagon had broken down outside of town, leaving them stranded with 3 small children and dwindling supplies. "No," Lillian agreed, leaning against his solid warmth as they stood on their porch watching the sunset. "But we can help the ones who cross our path, just like you helped me." Yates pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, letting you steal my bread." "And then giving me the whole loaf," Lillian added with a smile, turning in his arms to face him. "Though I've more than repaid you in bread since then." "That you have," Yates agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. "But it's not the bread I fell in love with, Lillian Ellsworth. It's the woman who bakes it." As they stood together in the gathering dusk, their children sleeping peacefully inside, Lillian reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of desperation to the heights of happiness, her life had been transformed by a simple act of kindness, by a man who saw worth in her when she had forgotten it herself. "I love you, Yates Ellsworth," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." "And I love you," he replied, his arms tightening around her as the first stars began to appear in the deepening blue of the evening sky. "My Lillian, my heart, my home." Together they turned and went inside, closing the door on the gathering darkness, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else in their lives together, with courage, with faith, and with an abiding love that had begun with a loaf of bread and had grown to encompass a lifetime of joy. In the years that followed, Taylorsville continued to grow and prosper, as did the Ellsworth family. Thomas and Sarah were joined by a brother, James, born in the winter of 1881, and the 3 children filled their home with laughter, occasional tears, and the endless energy of youth. Yates served as sheriff for 15 years, earning a reputation throughout the territory as a fair and honest lawman who kept the peace without unnecessary bloodshed. When he finally retired in 1891, handing the badge over to a younger man he had trained himself, the town held a celebration in his honor that lasted well into the night. "What will you do now?" Lillian asked him that night as they lay in bed, the sounds of their children sleeping peacefully down the hall a comforting backdrop to their conversation. "Thought I might try my hand at ranching," Yates replied, his arm around her shoulders as she nestled against him. "That parcel of land south of town that's for sale, it's good grazing country. We could run cattle, maybe some horses. Thomas is old enough to help now, and James is a natural with animals." "And what about Sarah?" Lillian asked, knowing their daughter had her father wrapped around her little finger. Yates chuckled. "Sarah can be the bookkeeper. She's got a head for numbers, that one, takes after her mother." The ranch became a reality the following spring, a modest operation they named Ellsworth and Sons, though Sarah insisted on equal partnership and got it, proving her worth not just with the books, but with her skill at breeding and training horses. The Ellsworth horses soon became known for their intelligence and steady temperament, sought after by ranchers and lawmen throughout the territory. Thomas, now a young man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's compassion, took to ranching with natural ease. James, more scholarly by nature, divided his time between the ranch and his studies, eventually leaving for college in Denver but always returning to help during the busiest seasons. And through it all, Lillian and Yates remained the center of the family, their love deepening with each passing year. The trials they had faced, the joy they had known, the children they had raised, all of it had been shared, every burden halved and every happiness doubled by the presence of the other. In the summer of 1900, as a new century dawned, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a gathering that included not just their children but the entire town of Taylorsville, many of whom had been present at their wedding all those years ago. Mrs. Holloway, now well into her 80s but still sharp-eyed and opinionated, sat in the place of honor beside Lillian. "Did I not tell you that Deputy would make a fine husband?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly despite her years. "I know a good man when I see one." "Yes, Mrs. Holloway, you certainly did," Lillian agreed with a fond smile. "And you were absolutely right." "Of course I was," the older woman sniffed. "And just look at what came of it: 3 fine children, a prosperous ranch, and you still the most respected family in the county." It was true, Lillian reflected as she looked around at the gathering. Thomas, now 24 and recently married to a sweet-natured girl from a neighboring ranch, stood talking with his father and some of the other ranchers. Sarah, 22 and fierce in her independence, was deep in conversation with the town's female doctor, a recent arrival who had caused quite a stir but had quickly proven her worth. And James, 19 and home from his second year at college, was entertaining a group of children with stories of life in the city. They had built something precious here, something that had begun with the simplest of acts: a hungry woman stealing bread, a kind man giving her the whole loaf instead of punishment. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and they stood together on the porch of the ranch house they had built a decade ago, Yates took her hand in his touch as familiar and essential to her as breathing. 25 years, he said softly, his gray eyes, now crinkled at the corners with age and laughter, meeting hers. "If someone had told me that day when I caught you with my bread that we'd be standing here now, I might not have believed them." "I certainly wouldn't have," Lillian replied with a gentle laugh. "I was too hungry to think beyond my next meal. And now look at us," Yates said, gesturing to the prosperous ranch around them, the well-tended buildings, the healthy livestock, the family they had created together. "All this from a loaf of bread." "Not the bread," Lillian corrected him, turning to face him fully. "From your kindness, from your belief in second chances, from your heart, Yates Ellsworth." He smiled, the same smile that had first given her hope all those years ago. "Well, Mrs. Ellsworth, I reckon we've both given each other plenty of reasons to be grateful over the years. And many more to come," she promised, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, the gesture as natural after 25 years as it had been on their wedding day. As they stood together under the star-filled Utah sky, Lillian thought about the journey that had brought them here: from desperation to love, from hunger to fulfillment, from 2 solitary souls to the heart of a family that would carry their legacy forward into the new century. It hadn't always been easy, and there had been times when the path ahead had seemed uncertain or fraught with danger. But through it all, they had held fast to each other, finding in their love a strength that could weather any storm. And it had all begun with a starving woman, a stolen loaf of bread, and the cowboy who gave her not just food, but a future filled with love.